Okay, I'm getting thumbs up from the people in the room here with me, so I'm going to start. So thank you for letting me introduce myself. For those of you who've just popped in to the meeting in the last few minutes, my name's Charlotte Owens. I'm an occupational therapist and I work in the Children and Young People's Neurodevelopmental Partnership. And we are the service that does autism and ADHD assessments for most young people in Somerset. So for young people aged 5 and above who live in the majority of Somerset, apart from that East Mendip area. And I've been asked to come and talk to you all today about masking and autism, what we know about masking and how we support young people who mask their presentation and present with that more internal presentation of autism. So I wanted to start very briefly by just recapping kind of as a service how we understand autism. So we very much come from a neuroaffirmative point of view that autism is a neurodevelopmental difference. It's a different way of someone's brain working, something that you're born with and that you have for your whole life. It's not something that we'd want to change about somebody, and it comes with strengths and challenges. And a lot of those strengths and challenges come from it not being the majority brain difference. So the world tends to be set up for the majority. And just like any difference, those strengths and challenges change throughout someone's life. So autism is a dynamic disability. So we know that there can be times where those strengths and challenges are much more evident and causing more difficulties than other times. We don't tend to use words like high and low functioning anymore because they're not particularly helpful. Instead, we tend to think of it like those pictures in the middle, that a unique person will have a unique profile of being autistic, where they have areas of quite spiky skill development. So they might have some skills that are really, really well developed and some skills that are developing at a different rate to their peers. But often when we're talking about autism, we all have a picture in our head of what that might mean. And often that picture in our head is about typical autism. And what I mean by typical autism is the kind of autism that's most commonly portrayed in the media, and that we often think of when we first bring it to mind. And typical autism tends to be very visible from quite a young age. These children often end up coming through to services and getting a diagnosis either before they've gone into primary school or pretty early on into primary school. And that's because they outwardly show lots of behaviours that we associate with autism. So there may be delays in their speech and language development. They might have certain sensory seeking or stimming behaviours. We might see them rocking or flapping their hands or bouncing up on their toes. We might see that their play is different to their peers and that it tends to be a little bit more focused on the detail of objects. And there's a picture there of a young man lining up his cars. And I think, that's what we often think about when we think about typical autism. But the reality is that that's just one presentation of autism, and that tends to be quite an external presentation of autism. Whereas actually, we know that autism can present in many different ways. And so most young people who present with this more, external presentation tend to come to services sooner. And historically, what that's meant is it's mostly boys, it's mostly white people, and it's mostly families who are able to access healthcare. So that's families where they're able to say, I'm worried about my child, something doesn't seem quite how I expected. We also know that there can be a much more internal presentation of autism. And what we mean by that is one that's not immediately recognisable to other people, because a lot of the ways of being in the world are happening internally. And when we talk about internal presentations of autism, it's really a presentation where that autism is masked or camouflaged. And what that's meant is that we know a lot less about it. So there's been less research around it. And a lot of the tools that we use to help us pick up autism were not initially developed for people whose autism presented like this. And so that means that people with an internal presentation of autism often get a diagnosis much later in life. And they often only get a diagnosis once they're not able to camouflage or mask anymore. And that normally is when their mental health has started to suffer and they've got to a point of displaying behaviours that are more obviously showing signs of distress. And for a long time, we talked about a male and female presentation of autism, but again, that's not really a very helpful way of us thinking about it. We do know that girls and women are more likely to present with an internal presentation of autism, but many boys present like this as well. And we need to be careful not to label this as just a presentation that we see in girls. But diagnosing autism and thinking about autism in your school settings is hard because what we're looking for is observable behaviours. And it's only when we see those behaviours that then we can start to try and unpick what's going on for that young person. So if those behaviours are all being masked, then it does make your jobs in schools and our jobs a little bit more difficult. And I think it's probably worth saying at this stage that a lot of the behaviours we see in autism in general are sadly the behaviours of an autistic person who's in distress, and that often when we're well supporting someone, we might not see those same behaviours. So we are now learning a lot more about autistic masking, and autistic adults have been really helpful in telling us about their experiences of masking. There's lots of new tools and assessment processes coming out to help us understand that unique experience of the autistic person. And there's been a lot of research that shows that 94% of autistic adults report regularly masking. So it's very, very common part of the autistic experience. We know that autistic children who mask tend to behave much more passively. And this means the reality in school means that they're often not causing as much disruption. And so they might go under the radar of very overstretched services. So the one child in the class who is quiet and shy and doesn't say much, it can be much harder to get to the bottom of what's going on for them. We hear that often these young people seem fine in school and have a very different presentation at home. And we're going to think a little bit about why that might be as we go through the session today. The young people tell us that often their meltdowns were written off as emotional outbursts. That's just, they're just quite emotional. Oh, they're just upset again. That's just how she is. And that often mental health explanations are considered much earlier than autism. So many of the teenagers we will see will come to us having already had significant support around managing their mental health, but nobody had actually thought about autism until quite late in the day. And that does mean, sadly, that referrals are often delayed. And so by the time we're seeing those young people, they are in quite a lot of distress. And so what we want to do is we want to get better at noticing masking earlier on so that those young people can come through to us at the right time and they can have the support at the right time to understand themselves. So thinking about what masking might look like, and it's a really difficult thing to define, but there are certain differences that we might see at different ages, and certain behaviours that we commonly hear about when we take a history to consider autism. So we know in those early years of preschool reception type years that these young people often have significant difficulty separating from their primary caregiver. So leaving mum or dad to come into the setting at the beginning is often really challenging, and that goes above and beyond what you'd see in that age range. They can cope in the setting sometimes by very strongly attaching to one adult or one peer, and as long as they're with that person, they seem okay. But if that person's not there, managing can be really difficult. They might be keen observers of the place, so they might be on the periphery of things, watching it all, but not actually joining in. And I think that's really hard when you've got a busy preschool full of lots of children to actually, you know, notice how involved that young person is in the play. And often these people have very complex play schemes that they set up. So they might set up the doll's house with all the equipment and it all looks like they're playing imaginatively, but actually they're not. There's a difference between functional play of being able to set up a scene and imaginary play, especially when you're involving another child and you're both able to give ideas and take it in any direction and be really flexible with where that imagination goes. Autistic children have a strength in noticing the details and setting things up, often how it was last week or how replaying a situation that they might have been in before. But if someone else comes along and offers another idea, that can be quite difficult. Many of our young people who present more internally tend to be situationally mute, and we used to use the term selectively mute, and we don't tend to use that anymore because situational mutism normally happens when a young person is incredibly anxious and unable to access spoken language. So it's much more about the situation and the environment than it is about the young person's choice in that matter. So these may be young people who rarely comment or talk, who only answer a direct question, or who aren't able to talk at all. So they can be seen as causing no problems, they're just shy, they're just quiet, they're very, very compliant, they follow all the rules. But we often will see subtle signs from their sensory processing that they're struggling a little bit to remain regulated. So they might be the nail biters, the hair twiddlers, the fingers and clothing in their mouth all the time. They often are very restricted in their eating, and they may struggle to master self-care routines like toilet training. And as those young people move into primary school, that internal presentation tends to be similar, but we will see it evolve a little bit. So they very often tell us how important it is that they are seen as liked at school and that they are seen as working hard and following the rules and getting it right. And that can mean putting a huge amount of pressure on themselves to be well behaved and compliant and to do exactly what is asked of them. We often see those difficulties with separating from parents and with managing anxiety carrying on well into, you know, the upper years of primary school. Sometimes these young people can become real perfectionists, and that can present in either spending a huge amount of time of trying to get their work right, or not being able to start something in case they get it wrong, or needing to ask you hundreds of clarifying questions just to be sure that they've got it straight in their heads. These young people often have quite high levels of absence for, you know, stomach aches, headaches, those kind of symptoms of finding school a little bit difficult. And generally their friendships continue to be a bit challenging. It's not that they don't have friends or that they don't want friends, but they're often on the edge of those friendships, or they have one or two very intense friendships. And it's usually towards kind of middle of primary school that parents start reporting when they get home, things are really different. This young person holds it together all day at home, and then all those emotions come out after school. And going forward to secondary school, this is often a transition where things go really wrong for our internal autistic young people. In a small structured primary school, they've often had the capacity to manage just about, but moving up to a big, busy secondary school where they might have 10 teachers who all have slightly different rules and expectations can be the straw that kind of leads to things not going so well. So usually we see anxiety becoming the biggest issue for these young people, difficulties getting to school every day, hiding, avoiding lessons, avoiding school altogether. The social relationships often become more problematic. As they become more complex, keeping up with understanding other people is hard. Understanding when they're being kind, understanding when they're taking advantage of you, all of those things start to happen. And so emotional-based school avoidance can often become a big problem in this group. We know that autistic people may find working in groups where they've got to take ideas on board with others hard. They're maybe either very, very controlling in that group or very quiet and struggle to join in. Lots of them tell us that answering questions and being put on the spot has a really big impact. And I think one of the things that's really difficult here is that they won't tell you any of this. It will not be something they will bring to your attention. So this young person could well be sitting in a lesson terrified about the fact that they know their English teacher is likely to ask them a question and not able to take in any of the rest of what's going on in that situation because the anticipation of that coming is just so difficult. It's not anybody's fault, but school environments are very, very challenging environments for almost all autistic individuals. If you wanted to design an environment that would challenge someone with autism, a school would be a good place to send them. And so what that means, unfortunately, is that those children who struggle to attend school are nearly all neurodivergent, and most of them have a diagnosis of autism or ADHD. So you can see here that there was some research conducted this year that showed that 92% of children and young people experiencing distress over attending school are neurodivergent, and 83% of them had a diagnosis of being autistic. So masking happens a lot, but why? Why might autistic people mask? So when we talk to autistic people, they tell us that they mask to try and fit in, to maintain those friendships that they've developed and to be accepted by the people around them, often to fly below the radar and to make sure that the spotlight isn't on them. Unfortunately, there is a lot of bullying and teasing that still happens if people know you're autistic, and so masking is a way to avoid that. To avoid the embarrassment of getting it wrong or coming to the attention of teachers. And I really can't overemphasize how often this one comes up in assessments, that the fear of getting it wrong or someone noticing me and bringing that to my attention is really challenging for our young people. To please others, especially their teachers, often our autistic people really struggle to know that you like them. And so one of the ways of knowing that is to try and act how they see other people acting, who they perceive that you like, to feel accepted, and to suppress behaviours that they might have been teased for in the past. So it may be that people have commented on in the past on their hand flapping that they do when they're excited or something like that, and they don't want that to happen, so they suppress those behaviours. But masking can involve lots of different things. So it might involve making eye contact with people, even when it feels uncomfortable. It might involve rehearsing scripts of what I might say to my friends tomorrow, you know, how I might ask a question about their weekend or how I might start a conversation with someone. Masking might involve laughing along with the group, even though you've no idea what they're laughing at, or going against your beliefs or doing something that feels really wrong to you just because speaking up is too difficult and you're so worried about embarrassment and humiliation. It might mean ignoring or suppressing your sensory sensitivities. So you're sitting there in a uniform that feels like you're being pricked by 1,000 needles, but you're trying to ignore that and sit still and look at the teacher because you know that that's what's expecting of you. It might involve mimicking gestures or the way that people speak. We see some autistic individuals who will use not only the words that they say, but also the way in which they say them and the tone of voice in which they say them to be exactly the same as their peers. It might mean saying you're fine when people ask you, even when you're not, and hiding your special interests to fit in. And I saw a great young person just this week who told me about their interest in Disney and how their friend is also interested in Disney. So it's a nice connecting factor, but they have to hide just how into that they are, because otherwise they're worried that person won't understand them. Masking as it sounds like, is absolutely exhausting. Okay, and what we are told by people who mask is that it feels like you can't ever be your true, authentic self. It feels like you're playing a role, and that nobody really wants to get to know you or cares about who you are. It can make people feel like they're wrong or broken if they turn up as their true self, and it can be incredibly lonely. And I've got a couple of quotes here that I just wanted to read you from some autistic young people. So just because you experience my autism mildly doesn't mean I experience it mildly. I mask to the point that I make everyone else feel comfortable, yet inside I'm desperately trying to hold everything together. And that's a quote from Frances Brennan, who's an autistic speech and language therapist. When I'm in class and I can't follow what's going on, I start to feel scared. I just freeze. I want to run out to the bathroom and cry, but I can't. I don't want anyone to think I'm a baby, so I just hold it all in and pretend I'm okay. And that's from an 8-year-old girl called Maya. And Summer, who's 15, says, for years I thought there was something seriously wrong with me because everyone else in the class seemed to manage. I am constantly self-regulating my emotions to meet society's expectations, which at times are totally unrealistic. And I think they're quite powerful in us hearing what that experience of masking is like. I think it's also fair to say that we all mask to some extent. So what makes autistic masking different? Because I can tell you that if I was to go to a dinner party with strangers who I hadn't met before, the way I'd present would be different to how I might be at a family meal with my friends and people who know me well. So we all adapt how we are in some situations. Masking is an adaptation. But autistic masking in reality is a stress response, and it's a way of coping when the world feels overwhelming. And a lot of what we see in autism is a stress response. It is people who are in an environment where their needs are not being well met. But we're often seeing those more external stress responses of fight or flight. I'm going to show you that I'm not coping in this situation. Whereas with masking, those stress responses tend to be those other two there, freeze and appease. So I'm going to shut down, and that's how I'm going to manage this situation. And masking can be conscious. It can be something that we plan and think about doing. But if it's something you've done for all of your life, it can also be unconscious as well. And that is really difficult because it can lead to lots of challenges of knowing who you are. If you've always masked, then understanding who you are and feeling that it's okay to be you can be really, really hard. And so we know that in a school setting, the needs of autistic students who have an internalized response to danger or stress often don't come to teachers' attentions. And so that later to come through to services. So why is school challenging then if you're autistic? Well, I think if we think about school for a minute and we think about the things that might be different if you're autistic, we can start to unpick why it's quite a challenging environment. So school involves a lot of social interaction and communication with your friends, with your peers, with multiple members of staff, all day, every day. School involves huge sensory processing challenges, environments that are out of our control most of the time, that are busy and noisy and overwhelming. And school involves lots and lots of different expectations, both from staff, parents, our peers and ourselves about what I should be doing, what it should be like, that you should have friends, that you should enjoy lessons, that you should be there to learn, all of those things. There are multiple executive functioning challenges as well at school. Memory, organisation, time management, all of those things that we know if you're autistic or neurodivergent tend to develop differently. They're all challenged in the school environment. There's differences in play and interaction and how you like to be in the world. And we like to think that schools are quite routine-led, and to a certain extent they are. But if you're autistic and you're expecting a routine, you'd actually be surprised how many changes and disruptions to that routine occur in a school environment. So maybe the teacher's off on a training course and there's a supply teacher, or maybe the teacher has moved the tables and chairs all around because it's Victorian Day, or maybe it's children in need and we've all come in our own clothes instead of uniform. Those small changes to routine can have a really, really big impact. So when we think about autism, we need to think about autism and the environment equaling the outcome. And this is really helpful because we can't and we shouldn't be wanting to change that autistic young person. What we need to do is adapt the environment around them so that we can help them to be supported in that situation. Children do well when they can, and that's one of my favourite quotes from Ross Green, who has a book about supporting children. We know that these young people want to do well, and so one of the most powerful ways we can support our autistic young people is understanding why school might be difficult for them and working with them around that, and challenging some of those fears and mistruths that perhaps we all still have around autism. So this is a helpful diagram that helps us think about some of the challenges in school, and we've talked about quite a lot of these already, but things like being rushed, having to talk in front of others, reading out loud, some of the lessons that are particularly challenging. So PE is often challenging because you have to get changed. There's lots of sensory challenges from that. It's often a much different environment. The rules are often much less clear. All sorts of challenges from PE. So that can be quite helpful to think about all of those different triggers for why young people might decide to mask in school and what might be going on behind that mask, because really that's what we need to think about. And what we see happening, and I know that you guys as Senkos hear happening time and time again, is that children appear okay in school, that at first glance it's hard to pick up on these subtle differences, and that the parents that you speak to then tell you a really different story about what's going on at home. And this is often referred to as the kind of Coke bottle effect. And I'm sure it's an analogy that you're all familiar with, that all those stresses that we looked at on this slide happening throughout the day are like somebody shaking up a bottle of fizzy pop, and the pressure in that building and building. And at some point, that pressure has to be released. And that pressure is normally released when we feel safest. And most of the time, that's going to be in our own environment with the people that know us best at home. And so when we go home after school, it's like taking the cap off that bottle or opening that can, and all that suppressed feeling and emotion from the day comes out. And so it's just a reminder for us to hold in mind that the quiet and compliant child in school is not necessarily calm and well regulated, that they might be feeling exactly like that shaken up can of Coke, and that those responses are normal responses for a young person's nervous system when they're in a state of dysregulation. And also holding in mind that it takes a lot of courage for parents to come and talk to you about that, and to have those conversations about how distressed their child is at home. So this is a phrase, fine in school, that I think comes up quite often. And I just wanted to take a little bit of time to think about what that means to our families. When parents are told we don't see that in school, it can be really difficult. We know that parents can feel very shamed and blamed for that. And as I was saying, it takes a lot of courage and vulnerability to come in and talk to a professional in school and say, life at home is really, really hard. Every day after school, we have meltdowns and shutdowns and behaviour that challenges. And so you guys have such a key role in supporting and validating those parents to feel heard and believed, and to make a plan of what you're going to do if a child is presenting very differently at home from school. Because parents know that you guys have the best intentions, and we also know that many children are able to appear okay in school, and that's actually not their experience. And parents hold a lot of knowledge as well. They're experts in their own child's behaviour. And when we look at referrals where there are differences between home and school, we're very much giving equal weight to all of that information that's coming to us. So it's okay that there are differences of opinions. Schools are experts in managing behaviour, group behaviour and individual behaviour, and a lot of those strategies use positive reinforcement of those things that are going well, taking things away when they're not going well. There's a picture there of one of the many different supports we can use to show, is my young person on task, sitting and listening, or do they need to have a warning or lose 5 minutes of break or things like that. Sadly, these strategies don't tend to work very well for young people who are distressed, or for our neurodivergent young people, because they're often reinforcing the need to mask in school, and they're increasing that anxiety about attending school. And they're not done with any bad intentions, but they can feel quite shaming. I can certainly say as an adult myself, if Mary was to put one of these up in the office and start moving me to the thundercloud every time I was not having a good day, I'm not sure I would want to work in this team for much longer. And I wanted to show you this, which was produced recently for me by a young person who masks in school. And I think this is such a powerful picture that shows what their school experience is like. And this is a teenager who's very articulately able to explain to me in an assessment how it feels to mask, but her school were totally unaware of this. So she's put all sorts of things up here that hopefully you can see. And some of the ones that really struck me, it takes 10 seconds to process one sentence. Pointless small talk. I'm not feeling okay, but they think I am. Invisible. I love acting. I do it all the time. They never see me. They see a mask. Why did I say that? Ah, so much to say, no way to say it. No one understands or gets me. Thoughts punch my head from the inside trying to escape. And I love this young person's drawings as well. I think it's a really creative way of thinking about masking. And I also wanted to think about the risks of missing or late diagnosis for our young people who present with a masked presentation. So we know that autistic people who present internally are much more likely, sadly, to suffer from other mental health problems in their life. It impacts self-esteem and confidence, and it can lead to anxiety and depression becoming big issues. We know that it really impacts a development of your sense of identity, and that feeds into those mental health problems as well. And there are much higher rates of suicide and rates of successful suicide, sadly, among autistic people who have an internal presentation or who mask. And girls and women are sadly disproportionately represented in those statistics. So there is a 4 times higher risk of suicide in autistic women than autistic men. And school exclusion is also really common amongst children with additional needs and autistic young people, particularly those ones who haven't had a diagnosis, can end up being excluded. So I was really struck by this statistic from Ambitious About Autism, and it's a few years out of date now, but in 2016 they found that 45% of autistic pupils had had an exclusion at some point in their school career, which is a shocking number, really. As we talked about before, one of those challenges with masking is that the autistic young person can present how they think we want them to present. And this means that they're really vulnerable to exploitation and predatory behaviours. And that might be sexual assault or exploitation. It might be grooming to do things they don't really want to do. It might be physical abuse or coercive control. And over 80% of autistic women report having experienced at least one sexual assault in their lifetime. Eating disorders and restricted eating patterns are sadly also common co-occurrences alongside autism. And we see a large proportion of young people come to us who are being treated for an eating disorder in their teenage years, and only now is autism being considered. And about 40% of girls with anorexia will also be autistic. And autistic burnout is something that we're just starting to know about and to understand. Autistic burnout is when an autistic person gets to the stage of not being able to mask anymore, not being able to hold it together. And it's a point normally where their functioning is really impacted. So that might mean they're unable to attend school, that even doing everyday activities like getting up and dressed can be really, really challenging. And it has really significant effects on long-term mental health. So it's really important that we notice these young people who are masking and we allow them to have an assessment to consider autism at the right time. It's also really important that we start to think with all our young people in schools about how it's okay to be different. And I'm sorry, I've just realised how blurry this slide is, which is a shame. I'll try and find a better quality picture for it. But it's something that as a service we really believe in, and that I personally really believe in, that it's important for young people to know what kind of brain they have so that we can know how to take care of it properly. And that's a message that in schools it's really helpful to start thinking about with all our young people. So I think it says in the bubbles there, so the one on the left, the NT, the neurotypical brain, says, I love being out in the world. It keeps me happy and it's a happy and comfortable place for me. And the neurodiverse brain is saying, for me, the world is often too loud, too busy. It can be very confusing and uncomfortable. So you guys are in a position to start those conversations with our young people in school about it's okay that we have different brains and we have different ways of being in the world. Sadly, we see a lot of young people where referrals have not been made or diagnoses haven't been given by services for reasons like the ones up here. And so I just ask you to hold in mind that none of the things on this slide mean someone can't be autistic. And I do appreciate what an incredibly challenging job it is in schools when we ask you to fill in all our forms with lots of details about young people. But your job is just to reflect what you see in school and support parents to do that bit. We don't expect you to know whether you've got enough for a diagnosis. That's our role, and we're happy to do that. There's not a autistic enough level of needing support. So some of the things up here that we commonly hear is, you know, although they make eye contact, so they can't be autistic. They've got a great sense of humour, or well, they want friends. They've got friends. You know, autistic people don't have friends. Or it's all just mum. Mum's just really quite anxious and overprotective. None of those things mean that somebody can't be autistic. It's a really complicated condition to diagnose. That's why we work as a multi-professional team where we have access to a whole range of professionals, speech and language therapists, psychologists, occupational therapists, nurses, paediatricians. We need that variety so that we can really investigate this complex condition. So what can you guys as schools do to support these young people, to notice these young people and to get them through to us at the right time? So embrace neurodiversity. Think about as we were saying earlier, that there's lots of different brain types, just like there's lots of other differences in all of us, and there's lots of different ways of learning and being in this world, and that they're all okay. I think it can be really helpful to talk to children about that in class, about how we all learn differently, about what I need to learn might be very different from what you need to learn, and to normalise having access to the things that we need. And that can be difficult when schools can want everyone to show the same behaviours, to show that they're engaged and listening in a lesson. And that's where teaching both staff and students about autism is really really important. So making sure that the staff in your schools know about neurodiversity and know about autism, and making sure that they understand that those differences in being in the world, those differences in play and language and communication, that they're okay. They're not things we should be trying to change. So things like enforcing eye contact is really, really unhelpful if you want to encourage young people who are masking and presenting in a more internal way to feel that it's okay to be them. And that means a lot more flexibility in our classrooms around people having access to what they need. As I said a few minutes ago, supporting those families to make referrals through to us. You guys don't have to be sure that a young person is autistic or has ADHD before making a referral. We'll consider all the evidence equally. And your evidence, even if it conflicts with parents, is still valuable and still helpful in us thinking about understanding that young person. But please do also believe those parents and young people and validate their experience. Remember just how much courage it takes to come into school and say, things at home are really difficult. I'm at the end of my tether. I don't know what to do. And remember that, as we said earlier, children, do well when they can. Autism has to be diagnosed by behaviours. And so we do appreciate when you're not seeing those behaviours in school, how difficult it can be. But I hope that by seeing some of the what happens next, if we don't understand people in time, can help us think about why that's so important. So allowing adaptations to support sensory needs in school is something that can be really, really useful. Having access to all those things and just noticing who's using them tells you a lot about the young people in your school. And rather than only using them when instructed, if they're there for everyone to use, you'll find that those young people who mask will suddenly, feel more able to use resources if that's just something that's normalized. The same goes for allowing adaptations to how we all communicate, for not enforcing, track the teacher or eye contact or things like that, for letting people have movement breaks or work in different seating positions or things like that. If that all becomes normal in this classroom, it allows us to see what everyone's individual preferences and needs are. And breaks and access to support really shouldn't be something that has to be earned, that's a privilege or that's taken away when somebody is struggling. So a lot of our autistic people who appear to be coping in school and who are masking quite heavily in school, they're only coping because those things are in place for them. And tipping that balance by taking away their time talking about their special interest or their time having a break in the library away from all the people can be really contradictory. And the most important thing that I know all of you as teachers value doing and go into the job to do is to foster that authentic relationship with your students. There's nothing more powerful than getting to know them and getting to know their interests. So that depth of knowledge of interests is such a strength of being autistic. And it's one of my favourite bits of the job is hearing about the young people's passions. And goodness me, there's days that I've learned more about steam engines or clay pipes than I ever thought I would know. But actually getting to know someone around their passions and interests tells you so much, and it shows that young person who is masking a lot of the time that you do care about them and that you do want to get to know them. They need really, really explicit examples of the fact that you know them and that they are safe in your classroom being themselves. And that means keeping your promises to them and being predictable. So if you say something is going to happen, that it happens. If there's a change that's unavoidable, that you own that with the young people and you make a plan for putting it right. And just a plea to kind of think about those behavioural policies that are more kind of old-fashioned in terms of how they support behaviour, and instead using things that that perhaps don't shame young people as much. So those are all ways we can help our young people to start to feel safe to be themselves in school, to unmask in school. And I think I just wanted to finish the presentation by saying, you know, that all autistic young people have a right to know they're autistic. They deserve a chance to receive the support and to understand themselves, and they deserve a chance to thrive. And what we know is there's a lot of protection that comes from knowing you're autistic and knowing that you're not just broken trying to exist in a world that doesn't quite feel right. And that's why, you know, we would encourage you to have those conversations around referral. Okay. Oh, I've got one more slide. There you go. So providing accommodation for autistic children requires teachers and educators to build strong and meaningful relationships, to understand their experience and interests, as every autistic child has different needs. It's important to consider strengths-based approaches when making accommodations. Get rid of that mentality that we need to fix the child and think about how can we guide and support them. So I just was really struck by those last two quotes, and I hope that they're helpful in thinking about things. Okay, I'm going to attempt to unshare my screen, and I'm very happy to take questions if anybody has any.
Anyone's got questions, and thank you.